So obviously you knew Ken Russell, the late Ken
yeah.
Russell, quite well, and you worked with Ken. What was Ken like to work with?
Yeah, it was actually quite affable and avuncular character.
Yeah.
I only got it in the neck from him once on the set, which was when I talked to or rather the actors came and talked to me about changing a line, and I said, yeah, that's all right. But I learned from incurring his wrath that that's not the kind of conversation that you have without the director being present. So,
Sure.
but every couple of days he would let off steam with one or other of the crew, really. But to be honest, he was he was kind of like more of a teddy bear most of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first met him, you know, everyone knows what he kind of looks like, and he kind of comes over like, because they've all seen him on TV. He's kind of mad professor in a way, you know, and quite kind of abrasive. But actually not abrasive in terms of, you know, I've worked with a lot more cantankerous and objectionable directors, especially since then, who have very little track record compared to the films that Ken had under his belt by then. So in terms of working with and I was a completely unknown writer then. I mean, he was in a way a kind of dream to work with, in that he didn't bully me or railroad the script. What he did do was he just kind of flew off at a tangent at times when it suited him when he was filming it. So he'd have whole new scenes that he wanted to film that he'd get excited about while he was actually filming. I think that was more from his background of making his own films, and in that way he was more, you know, a lot more of a pure filmmaker than probably this generation, which is that he had a real instinct for kind of just throwing the camera around, in a sense.
Because one of the films you did was Gothic, wasn't it, in 1986?
That's right. Yeah.
Do you want to say much about, you know?
Well, that funny enough, I didn't envisage that as a Ken Russell film at all. I was working in advertising at the time, and I was burning the midnight oil, writing screenplays, sending them off, getting the stamp, sending them off, writing another one, you know, tapping the keyboard, and then I through an agent that I got the film to Virgin Films, which is one of Richard Branson's early companies. And then it went quiet for about 2 years, and they phoned up, and I was still working in advertising. They phoned up and they said, we got a director for you, Ken Russell. He signed up to do it. So I put down the phone, and my art director, Robin, was across the table from me. And I said, if you had written a film, who's the director that you'd least want to direct it? And he said, Michael Winner. And I said, second choice. And he said, Ken Russell. So that was quite funny. I always remember that.
They're both quite strong characters, aren't they? I remember.
But the thing was, he was, on the one hand, his career wasn't at its height in a way. He'd done a fantastic film, Altered States, in America, but then he did a not so fantastic film called Crimes of Passion. So I would say he was not at his height, but not completely on the decline at that point. But he'd still directed two of the most amazing films. I mean, Tommy was the soundtrack to me when I was in art college, and The Devils I still think is in my top 10 films of all time, just for kind of visceral impact, really, and a kind of anger and the aesthetic quality of it. It's just a beautiful. It's definitely film. It's
definitely one of the videos.
So there were pluses and minuses about the prospect of working with Ken, or Ken directing the film. So I just took a very, very deep breath and just kind of like went along with the experience of it, really. It was going to be, I think from that moment, it was going to be what it was, really, in a sense.
Do you believe at all now, Stephen, in the paranormal?
Well, actually, I don't. And as I say, people find it very shocking almost when I've written so many ghost stories and supernatural things that I can stand here and say, no, I'm completely sceptical.
Sure.
I'm a kind of Richard Dawkins kind of tolerant, I think, atheist, really. But it doesn't stop me being really. I'm obsessively interested in what people believe in, and how those beliefs affect how they behave, and especially characters that, on the one hand, believe in life after death, and other people that are completely skeptical about it. That juxtaposition I find really, really interesting, because it's the most important question that we can actually think about. I think philosophically. So the idea of I'm not a philosopher, so I don't write about it philosophically. I don't even write about it psychologically or scientifically, but I write about it dramatically. So what I do is I construct scenarios where that debate, if you like, is a dramatic debate between characters and their actions, you know. So I'm kind of playing with the ideas that I'm interested in academically, but it's all about the emotion of the stories, really.
Does it surprise you when people, sometimes hear the truth about maybe a medium that's faking, or maybe they find that a paranormal event isn't a paranormal event? Does it surprise you the amount of upset that people feel once they find the real truth?
I think it interests me that people invest so much in belief systems of any sort of kind, whether it's UFOs, which can be a kind of religion, as we talked about earlier, or whether it's Marxism. You know, Marxism can become so entrenched that it becomes part of you as a person, and you can't shrug that off easily. You can't, someone that believes that, as someone did in this very town where we're speaking, believed that crop circles were created by wind vortexes. When Doug and Dave turned up and said, no, actually we did it with a plank and a bit of string, they're not going to say, oh, sorry, those 2 books I wrote were complete bollocks. I mean, human nature is such that people do not back down on their agendas if they believe them as deeply as that. And that's fascinating in itself.
It is,
In a funny kind of way, as a dramatist, I'm less interested in whether something's objectively true or not, although I have my private beliefs, but or conclusions, I should say, not beliefs. But to play with the arena of those ideas, I find really interesting. It's why, for instance, I'm interested in spiritualism. Spiritualism is a really interesting phenomenon historically, and it has its it wears a slightly different suit today, but it's still there in culture very, very strongly. Living TV and that kind of thing. It looks different, but it's the same thing. But a lot of my things I've written, be it Gothic or Afterlife or The Awakening, they often have seance scenes in them. And that's because I find the seance a really theatrical, almost literally theatrical kind of emblem to encompass all the things I'm interested in. It's a bunch of people in a room that believe something and they want something to happen. There's a sense of anticipation, of closure, they're all there because their personality has brought them there for an event, And I think that's why I like that in the same way that John Ford liked gunfights. I think the seance for me is a kind of template that you can use in lots of different stories to mean different things.
I mean, I agree there, because often you see that in people doing paranormal investigations. When you get a group of people together, they've got that shared belief, and they're almost wanting everything to happen.
Well, Ghostwatch was of course about that metaphorical kind of seance and pact in a way that the audience makes with the maker of the program, and then I'm sure it comes across that the ghost happens on Ghostwatch because the audience wanted to appear. It's almost like the audience conjures it up, and one of the characters in the show says, we've created a giant seance or something.
Because you mentioned, I know we were chatting earlier about the Michael Persinger, the God helmet as well. That you're quite interested in that kind of. Do you want to, I mean, obviously people won't understand what I mean by the God helmet, but do you want to explain what particularly interested you in that?
Well, I'm interested that Michael Persinger. Well, first of all, Michael Shermer, I think his name is, has written books, Why People Believe Stupid Things. And those kind of books really interest me. But the Michael Persinger thing is, he's found. I might be paraphrasing this horribly, but he's found that if you stimulate a certain part of the brain in a certain way, with electrical current, I suppose, or electrical fields, people will have what is very similar to a religious experience, or religious or mystical experience. So how much of it is down to biology or the vagaries of the chemicals, that are coursing through our body? As chemical.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, it does.
But the other thing, I went to a talk in the Bath Literary Festival this week, Susan Greenfield, and she talked quite often about the narrative that we also have a sense of narrative about ourselves, and I find that really interesting. That we, in dramatic terms, obviously, that we might you know the syndrome where, I know if I go on the phone to my mum, I become a different person than if I'm talking to people I work with.
Sure.
We're all different people at different times, that kind of thing. But what is our sense of how we're prepared to change and that kind of thing? How many times do we change through our lives?